Hello, in this video we're going to demonstrate how to use Pane to arrange nodes in a JavaFX application, and we're also going to look at layout panes more generally. So, what is a Pane? Well, when we're writing graphical applications such as JavaFX applications, we often have a lot of components that need to be placed at different spots in our window. So, here's our window. For example, you might be writing some kind of dialog box, and along the bottom you want a series of buttons. Now, it would be incredibly cumbersome if we had to manually position these at pixel locations for every component. Imagine how much work it would be if we had a very complicated graphical user interface and we needed to manually place every component of our user interface. It just wouldn't work. So, JavaFX provides us with a whole bunch of different layout panes. And so what a layout pane does is it contains a set of child nodes which it is responsible for arranging. And then it's the layout pane's job to actually figure out where each button needs to go. So, sorry, not button, each node needs to go. And there are a few panes that we can use in JavaFX. For example, you might want to use a border pane. A border pane, for example, splits up our window into regions. We've got a top region, a bottom region, a left region, a right region, and a center region. And so what we do when we're using a border pane is we add nodes to some of these locations, and then the border pane is responsible for figuring out exactly the size and the positions of where its children need to be drawn. Another one we might want to use is the one we're going to look at in this example is a pane. So here's our window again. And what a pane does is evenly distribute its children among the available space. And so, for example, if we were showing image thumbnails, we might use a pane. And so what would happen is it would neatly arrange its items, and then once it ran out of horizontal space, it'll jump down to the next row, next column. Sorry, next row. It's getting late. So it will evenly arrange our items like that. So now that we know what a pane is, let's see one in action. Over in Eclipse, we will create a new Java project, and I will call this Pane Demo. We'll add a new class to this, also called Pane Demo. And what we need to do is the following. First, we will make our class extend from application. All right. Next up, we're going to have our start method. Okay, what we're going to do inside our start method is actually create a pane object. So we'll have a variable which is of type pane, and we'll call this pane. And we will use the default constructor to set our pane. Okay, so what we'll do next is add some nodes to the pane. And so the way we do this is we first obtain the list of children that belong to our pane. So the getChildren method actually returns a list which we can then add things to add more nodes to our pane. And the way we're going to do this is called add all. And inside this method, we'll add a few nodes. The first one we'll add is a label. And we'll say first name. Okay, the next thing we'll add is a new text field. And we will also add another label, another text field. Actually, no, let's leave that right there. Okay, so we've added 3 things to our flow pane. What we're going to do now is add another text field to this, but we're going to actually modify it slightly. So for that reason, we're going to store it as a variable. What we're going to do to our text field is modify the preferred column count. So the way we do that is tfmi.setPreferredColumnCount, and we'll set this to 1. Okay, next up we'll add the text field we just created. So again, get the children list and then add to it. We're going to add the tfmi text field we just created, and we're going to also add another label with last name and another text field. Okay, so what we're going to do now is create a scene for our pane. So we'll set the pane as the parent object. We'll set the window size to be 200 by 250. Now we'll set up our primary stage to get this on screen. Alright, what we'll do now is jump out of our start method and create a main method and call launch. Okay, so now we have enough code that we can actually run this program and have something on our screen. So when we run this, you can see how this is kind of working. We have our first name text field, our middle initial text field, which we made smaller. Remember, we set the preferred column count to 1. And we have our last name text field. And so what we do now is if I resize this window, we'll see the flow pane in action. So as I widen this, you can see it starts to use up more and more of the horizontal space. And as we start to reduce the width, more and more things go down onto the next row until we have something like this. So you can see how flow pane is evenly distributing the items that it contains, the nodes that it contains. So what we're going to do now is modify this appearance a little bit because it's a bit clunky having all of our nodes drawn so close together. So there are a couple of things we're going to do to modify our flow pane. The first one is to set the padding of our flow pane. So set padding, and this takes an insets object. So what we're going to do is create a new insets, and the constructor for this will take 4 integers. So what I'm going to do is specify 11, 12, 13, and 14. And get our import there. So now when we run this, you will see that we have more spacing around the top, left, right, and bottom of our window. So you can see here that all the components want to be further and further from the edge, which is fine. So what we're going to do now is modify the gap between the components. The padding is the padding for the entire pane, so what happens around the outside. And we can also specify the spacing between our components. And the way we do that is with horizontal gap property and the vertical gap property. So the way we change this is by going pane.setHgap, and we set this to a number. So in our case, we're going to use 5. We can do the same thing with the vertical gap. It's just set vgap, like that. So now when we run this program, you can see that we've got a bit more spacing between our components. And so with that, that's it for this video. We've demonstrated how to use a flow pane to arrange items in a JavaFX application. Thanks a lot.